Everybody, what's up? Gukill here, and this is something that's excited me for such a long time. I am super excited to finally be able to post this up for you guys. And the thing is that this is going to be the first video of a series of videos that I'm going to post about Diablo 3 and Demon Hunters in particular. But this idea for this video series came actually from this season specifically because I had chosen to play Demon Hunter, and those of you who've seen my videos beforehand are going to know that I have been posting nonstop about Demon Hunters. I've been offering advice everywhere that I can offer it. But somebody had asked me, hey, have Demon Hunters always been this week? And I kind of said, no, they haven't. Things were different in different seasons, but then I started to really think about that, and Demon Hunters go far, far further back than just Season 3, Season 2, Season 1. You know, even going back to Reaper Soul's launch, I started thinking to myself, wow, Diablo 3 has been out since 2012. That's crazy. I mean, let's face it, every other video game basically has a year to 2 year shelf life before everybody has just picked up and moved on with the game. And Diablo 3 hasn't done that. Diablo 3 is actually probably going stronger than it ever has before. Maybe you want to make an argument for the first couple of weeks that it came out. But the reason I'm actually posting this video is because once I started to think about the past and think about where Diablo 3 was in 2012 compared to where we're at now, Season 4, the game is completely different. And I kind of looked around and saw that, you know what? I haven't really seen a video that really kind of chronicles how the game has evolved and done it in a way that focuses specifically on one class. So I got the idea to do this literally because I don't know about you guys, but I love talking about gaming in the past. I love talking about memories I had as a child playing Diablo 2 on my computer, playing Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, playing all those console games that, all us 90s kids really loved, Final Fantasy, Crash Bandicoot, all that stuff. And the thing is that Diablo has kind of created a history for itself as well, being in existence for as long as it has, and also changing so dramatically. So where to begin? Well, I'm going to start right at the moment that hopefully spurred your guys' excitement as it did me when I saw it for the first time. But this is the first part of a video series that's going to go over the legacy of the Demon Hunter in Diablo 3.
Present to you the world premiere of Blizzard's newest game.
It has been said that in the end of all things, we would find a new beginning. But as the shadow once again crawls across our world, and the stench of terror drifts on a bitter wind, the people pray for strength and guidance. They should pray for the mercy of a swift death. For I have seen what the darkness hides.
Isn't it crazy to think that that was 2008? 2008 is when that came out. Diablo 3 launched in 2012. What happened? 4 years from announcing a game for Blizzard to actually come out with a full-fledged release? Well, I guess that's par for the course for that company. But as soon as that video came out, rampant speculation started happening, at least as far as what are the classes going to be? Are they going to stay true to Diablo 2 and stay with 5 classes? Or are they going to go with Lord of Destruction and do 7 classes? Are they going to go with completely different? Or are they going to keep with the same classes that they had in Diablo 2? Keeping people with a sense of familiarity. What's the story going to be? Who was that monster we saw at the end of that cinematic? Well, for those of us who enjoyed range classes in Diablo 2, especially the Assassin when they were able to drop down their traps, and the Amazon who was able to shoot with bows or throw spears, we eventually got our answer as to what we would be getting in Diablo 3.
Someone survived.
Don't come any closer.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So the Demon Hunter class was revealed to us to actually see in its glory. A dark, shadowy assassin figure that would use ranged weapons and possibly even melee weapons, with the lore behind it that all they sought out was killing other demons. So how would this actually translate out into gameplay? We hadn't seen really much of anything yet, so how would this fare out? Well, pretty awesome if I do say so myself. We finally got glimpses at Demon Hunter real gameplay at BlizzCon 2010. As you can see, we're getting demoed things like Bola Shot, we're being demoed the actual playstyle, and Demon Hunters were supposed to feel like this range class that used weapons and gadgets and felt tactical and really gave us a sense of more engaging gameplay than we had previously known with the Amazon or the Assassin, since they were essentially those two classes combined into one. As you can see, they start to cover things like spike traps. They covered a ranged ability earlier in the video. We're actually talking about Vault. This was the first glimpse that we got to see of the Demon Hunter, at least in its pre-beta stage. Everybody was so hyped about every single class that was coming out, so much so that actually the main feature of one of the BlizzCons, I can't remember if it's 2009 or 2010, but I believe the main announcement was announcing a class for Diablo 3. People were extremely hyped about this game coming out. So how did it all pan out? I mean, surely we had to go into a beta test, right? I mean, we're at BlizzCon 2010. This game was announced in 2008. So it has to be coming out soon, right? How did things fare out there? Well, the beta did come. And the beta had quite a different look and feel to what we know out of Diablo now. I mean, look at the user interface. Look at the player icons. I mean, this game looks completely different to what we know now. This is actually real beta footage of somebody playing the Demon Hunter. I unfortunately don't have my own footage because 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I wasn't exactly recording footage myself. So I'll make sure I post credits in the comments below. But Demon Hunters themselves looked awesome to begin with, having Hungering Arrows an initial skill, having 2 resources to manage, but there were some problems with the beta test itself. The main problems that were happening with the beta was beta had a limit as to what you could actually do on it. So while people were able to test a very, very early portion of the game, as you can see by the change in user interface. There were obviously icons in place for plans that never actually got implemented into the launch. You could kind of see that there were limits on what they could actually test, and this wound up coming to haunt Blizzard later on, which we'll talk about later. But let's just talk about for 1 second here how there were these awesome ideas that were placed into beta. They got people excited about it. They were looking at this interface, they were looking at some of the things that they couldn't unlock yet, and yet none of this stuff came to fruition. It is absolutely amazing considering that when beta came out, and also considering how long it took for beta to come out, that a lot of these abilities never actually wound up making it to the game. Blizzard let us test such an incomplete version of their game from what actually ended up launching on that fateful day in May, that it's amazing they let us test it at all. I mean, people were excited, people were hyped, people were ready to go and see what was coming next, and immediately they saw content getting scrapped. Not only that, but Blizzard created an intrigue with what is the endgame like? What's beyond the Skeleton King? What do the future acts look like? I wonder what Act 4 is going to look like, because we're going to be going to hell, right? That has to be the case. We're going to have to kick some Diablo butt, right? Everybody wanted to know what was going to go on, but the thing is that nobody actually got to test it. So there was no feedback except for what was coming internally from Blizzard themselves. So while they created that mystery and intrigue that had everybody rushing to want to see what happened, that strategy actually came back to really bite Blizzard in the butt. And we'll talk about that later, but as we approached the end of beta, the day was finally coming upon us. We had run up and down for hours and hours a day this level 1 to 15 experience right up to Skeleton King, practicing things like crafting, skills, beta tuning changes. You know, we obviously saw some things get scrapped away from the game, but we were still excited about it because the game up to that point had been really fun, and we were looking forward to some of the awesome new things that Blizzard had promised, like Inferno difficulty, where we promised you will die, and they weren't wrong about that. Promising awesome cool things like a new and improved campaign system that would relate a little bit more to people who had already been exposed to World of Warcraft type leveling, and also have a more enhanced story than its predecessor in Diablo 2. Well, how did that exactly fare out? How did launch day feel for Diablo 3 and for any of us who were rolling a Demon Hunter? Well, this is kind of how everybody's Diablo 3 launch date turned out. Yes, that's right, the day finally came and we were stuck here. This is important to mention because this deterred people away from Diablo 3 right away. This is something that legitimately caused people to rage out, rate the game 1 out of 10 stars, and never bother with it again. In my experience, I eventually got through, but it took about 2 hours, and also took many error 37s later. It also took a lot of error 9,000 and something because I couldn't create a character. This was a struggle for all of us. This was the hardest boss in the game up to this point. But it did get better. We were able to enter the game, and as we leveled through the game, everything was super new and exciting. Act 2 and Act 3 blew me away the first time that I played it. I got access to new skills, I got access to these beautiful new environments. The game ran super smooth. It's still funny to me to go back and look at this footage and just seeing how different the game actually was. I mean, the game had such a different progression of difficulty compared to what we know now. No customizable difficulty, instead staying true to what Diablo 2 was, which was having normal difficulty that you play through all the way, having nightmare difficulty that is a little bit harder than normal, but you play all the way through that as well, then going through hell difficulty, which had a steep increase in difficulty, and then moving on to Inferno, which we'll get to talking about that later. But the leveling experience for the most part was fun, it was challenging, and it was rewarding. You got to have moments, as you're seeing now, where in nightmare difficulty, and not even being close to capped, you were able to face challenge. Now, obviously, this is kind of a speed experience trick that was being used at the time, but there was still that desire, that burning rush to get up to max level, to test out new skills and see how you fared in this all hardcore amazing Inferno difficulty. How would this play out? Nobody had any idea what was good or what was bad. We could only just base it on data mine skills and kind of make educated guesses. Nobody had a chance to test gear. Nobody had a chance to test end level crafting. Nobody had a chance to test some of the affixes that were going to wind up later playing the game with some serious issues. So at the beginning, everything was great. Everybody had their nostalgia goggles on and they were just happy to be playing something new related to Diablo. And I mean, the sales show that. They crushed in the sales. This game sold millions of copies within the first week. And I can honestly say, I don't think I've seen any kind of fever about any of Blizzard's games as I saw, maybe except for World of Warcraft expansions being released. But I don't think I saw anything as passionate as Diablo 3. I mean, people who maybe didn't even play Diablo 2 were like, I have to play this game. This is going to be the biggest thing ever, and I need to be part of it. So how did that shape up? It didn't go exactly as planned. You see, while the whole concept of having a hardcore elitist difficulty was super exciting for people who had played Diablo 2 and had longed for a difficulty that would truly challenge the skilled gamers. But there were problems with it. Oh, there were problems with it. You see, legendary items, if you saw one, props to you. It's not something that I ever saw in my experience playing at launch Diablo 3. And to be honest with you, once legendary did drop, they were immensely disappointing. They sold for millions and millions of gold, because back then there was an auction house where you could purchase items from for gold. Real money wasn't available at the time, but they sold pretty much because of the fact that they were rare, but they weren't particularly good. Legendaries didn't have any affixes on them to make them overpowered compared to normal weapons. So at the end of the day, not only did you not see legendaries, but they didn't really affect your character that much. The other issue that we ran into was the fact that in Inferno difficulty, things hit you so hard that you had to do exactly what we were doing right now as Demon Hunters, which is kite pretty much all the way through the map and hope that you dealt enough damage before something hit you, because it would one-shot you, and then you could progress forward. So you literally spent hours progressing through a map, just trying not to get killed, trying to DPS things down before they would inevitably DPS you down. And worst yet is that most of your items were yellows and blues that you had to hope would roll with mostly damage statistics. Let me give you an idea of how bad the system was. And I like everything to do with Diablo nowadays. And at the time, I defended this. I defended this like nobody else would have defended this. I was convinced, no, you guys have it wrong. This is fine. You just need to get used to it. No. I was wrong, and I can admit that now. This system was terrible. The loot that dropped frequently, which was a good feeling because you were constantly getting loot. The problem was that loot could roll with anything. You could get strength, you could get intelligence, you could get things like resists as a main roll on your gear, because there were no secondary stats. You could get anything. So most of the time, you wound up with inventories full of just random gear, and especially with yellows, which you had to identify back then. Oh, by the way, you had to identify them one by one too. You really had to hope that you got something that was going to be worthwhile for your character, that was going to roll with dexterity, vitality, that your gloves would get critical hit chance or critical hit damage. And most of the time it didn't happen. So these maps that you spent forever farming on, going back to the beginning of the map, trying to kill elites and kill large packs of enemies, hoping that you're not going to get one shot and killed, well, to be blunt, you rarely were rewarded for it. And it caused a lot of people to just simply log out and say, it's not worth my time to play for 4 or 5 hours and get no loot. And I agree with them. That's not a way that Diablo should have been structured. And I think had people been able to beta test that and been able to give it feedback, Blizzard would have known that and would have changed the way that loot worked, but they didn't know that because they didn't give players a chance to test that out. Oh dear. Demon Hunters, Wizards, Witch Doctors, we were all glass cannon specs, doing everything we could to just stay alive as best we could, kill things before they killed us. Barbs and Monks had a better time than we did, but not much better. They were able to survive hits a lot easier, but only through virtue of having shields and being able to stack resistances. But that left them doing next to no damage. So while there were some DPS specs out there, ultimately if you were trying to progress through Act 2 or Act 3 Inferno, you were not doing very much damage and you were basically hoping that you could just survive. The last bit that we should talk about here, well, we should talk about items. And items played a big part in the game, not just because of what I talked about before with their statistics, but also because of the way progression worked. The way item progression worked was, in order to have a more powerful character, you had to have gear with an increased item level. You've probably seen item level on gear now, but more in the sense of a required item level. So you need to be 70 in order to use 70 gear, but ultimately there is just level 70 gear, and that is good. But back then, you had to have progression because Inferno difficulty was purely for level 60. Now, they had the idea that you would need to earn gear in order to improve your character to move on to the next act, which is great if you love that kind of progression style of gameplay. But the problem was that your character coming out of Hell difficulty, which often had item level 58 to maybe 57 gear, some 59s, it was not even close to being good enough to do Act 1 Inferno. You had to kite for days, and God forbid you were in a group, because back then being in a group also multiplied elite and normal mobs damage. With 3 people, it was 45% increased damage. Players were being one-shot like nobody's business, like you wouldn't believe. It was bad. And in order for you to eventually be geared enough to do Act 1 Inferno, you had to have item level 60 gear. Item level 60 gear only dropped in Act 1 Inferno, which made no sense, and it got worse as you moved on. In order to be able to do Act 2, you needed item level 61 gear, which only dropped in Act 2. So you had to bash your face against this brick wall of progression, hoping that that loot that we talked about, that how you were filling your inventory with blues and yellows, that you hoped would be an upgrade, yeah, that didn't come easy. That came at the expense of your time, hours and hours of farming and death, which if you did in a group was even more painful, and probably you dealt with some extreme frustrations due to some of the annoying elite affixes, like, I don't know, invulnerable minions, or how about the fact that after a certain amount of time, elites would enrage and one-shot your party, or they would just simply reset if you were out of combat for too long. Yeah. Not exactly the best method in order to inspire progression, let's just say that. Ultimately, progression wasn't really that fun. People just wanted to be geared and kill things. Isn't that what Diablo 3 is all about anyway? So what ended up happening was people went and they found out ways that they could farm gold efficiently, and then they took themselves to the gold auction house, and they simply bought the gear that they needed in order to progress further, thereby skipping most of the gameplay. And we wonder why we don't have an auction house anymore. Maybe because it inspired people to not play Diablo 3 and then go in and just skip the whole point of progression in the game. That was the primitive state of what Diablo 3 launch was. And for Demon Hunters, it was especially painful because we had to deal with things like reflex damage, dealing truckloads of damage to us if we weren't perfectly careful with our skills and when we were dealing damage. It was engaging gameplay, but it was also extremely tedious. And is tedious fun? For me personally, it's not. For a lot of people, it wasn't. And I saw a lot of people roll over to monks or barbarians because they simply wanted to be able to survive and hit things, as opposed to playing this hit and run style. But have no fear, Diablo 3 launch wasn't perfect, but as people started to figure out which stat weights and which items were actually good for their classes and what skills to use, then Demon Hunters faced a day which, to be honest, I don't even think Demon Hunters have felt this kind of power for their class ever since. Yes, there were a couple things that worked to Demon Hunters' advantage. One, people found out pretty quickly that attack speed was an incredibly important stat, and it was actually the best stat in the game, considering that attack speed items rolled so high. I'm not talking the 7% that we know now. I'm talking rings were able to roll with 14% attack speed. Same thing for items like amulets and rings. So what wound up happening was for most classes, and especially with the advent of the auction house, they immediately went out and bought blue rings. Yeah, that's right. They bought blue rings that had only attack speed on them, because that's how much of a damage increase that was. It was massive, and for demon hunters, this worked in particular with nether tentacles, because back in these days, lifesteal was a stat, and it was an all-important stat, because for a lot of classes, this was the only way that they could stay alive. Without a lot of healing tools, and especially with Blizzard taking a different stance towards potions and wanting to use them defensively rather than offensively, classes were in a tough spot, demon hunters especially, where if they took damage, they didn't have a lot of ways to recover it. So lifesteal was a big deal. And nether tentacles not only provided lifesteal, but combining nether tentacles with insane amounts of attack speed meant that they were able to shoot off their nether tentacles at a quick enough rate to deal not only huge amounts of damage, but then they would also be able to steal their life back faster. So in situations where they maybe got hit and they had low life and no potions available, they could just simply damage and they would gain their life back. The other situation that this worked out great in was reflex damage monsters, which to this day, that kind of model still exists with life per hit and life regen. You damage the enemy, you take damage. If you have a way of being able to restore your life, you're going to be able to live longer. And this was no different, and demon hunters were the masters of this. I saw once this got figured out, people instantly rolled demon hunter, instantly, and got their attack speed gear, put on their demon hunter. I know even myself, because I had recently switched over to a monk and was struggling through Act 2 Inferno. And then I saw my friends all blasting through Act 4 Inferno. Oh baby, you could bet I was on demon hunter like that. I was there. And they dealt huge amounts of damage because they were able to combine with the passive ability Sharpshooter, which is something that currently demon hunters look at and kind of have a laugh about. But back in those days, being able to have 100% crit and also shooting off your nether tentacles, which at the time was the most powerful spell that demon hunters had in their arsenal. Oh yes, there were some good times. I personally wasn't able to kill Inferno Diablo before they came out with the big nerf patch. And the big nerf patch was sad days for demon hunters. And it's kind of, in a way, demon hunters have never really recovered from their godlike status when it comes to their class in comparison to other classes. Yes, the nether tentacles attack speed nerf. It hit us hard, and it wasn't very fun. Nether tentacles almost instantly became completely useless. The lifesteal, as well as the attack speed on it, was completely nerfed, and attack speed itself was nerfed, with every single item that had attack speed on it having it be cut in half. And now you understand why attack speed caps out at 7%, because the stat itself was just simply too valuable and too overpowered for every single class in the game. Demon hunters were hit especially hard with this. I remember logging into my demon hunter after the patch had come out and being absolutely flabbergasted that my gear, which cost hundreds of dollars back then, yes, the real money auction house was alive and well. People poured money into their demon hunters, hoping to capitalize on this attack speed buff and hoping to capitalize on some fun, engaging gameplay where we could be glass cannons and we could stomp through monsters. Well, we got to do it for a little bit, and then it all got nerfed and taken away from us. It sucked. I saw a lot of people actually quit Diablo 3 entirely, completely in shock and in rage over the fact that their gear, which they had spent either hundreds of millions of gold on or hundreds of dollars of real money on, suddenly become useless overnight. We had to find a different way to gear. We had to find a different way to excel. And there were ways to do that, but for the time being, Diablo 3 was a disaster. And I'm able to look back at this now and say it with honesty, but Diablo 3 was a terrible game at this point. For those who have only played Reaper of Souls, or maybe you've only begun to play Reaper of Souls, you have to consider this. There was no adventure mode. The only thing that you could do was continually rerun quests in the story. Often this led to people just going to the bigger areas like Fields of Misery in order to farm, because there was simply nothing else to do. There was no Paragon leveling. Once you were 70, that was it. Your entire progression came from gear, and gear wasn't easy to get. As a matter of fact, it was downright mind-numbingly frustrating to get. The thing was that there wasn't any sense of progression other than just killing things. Maybe you were one of the people that had killed Inferno Diablo. What do you do after that? The answer was really nothing. All you had to do was farm. Farm for better gear, I suppose, and be able to compare yourself against other people's gear, but ultimately there was no reward in it. People didn't feel any sense of progression and they just left the game in drones. There's a reason why people don't look back fondly on Diablo 3 at their launch especially as a great game, because it wasn't. It was empty. It was devoid of any sort of feeling of wanting you to continue to play. And I mean, sure, the hardcore progression of Inferno difficulty may have been something that maybe a select few people want, but for the most part, in an action RPG, you don't want to be stuck on a single boss for days on end because it simply hits too hard for you to kill. That's not what Diablo was about. Nobody had great memories of going in to do Mephisto in Diablo 2 and it taking 5 hours of progression to be able to kill it. It was about the Mephisto runs. It was about killing things and getting loot, slowly increasing your level, because getting level cap wasn't an easy deal. It was almost like Diablo 3 was a mix between Diablo and Warcraft, and it ended up actually being neither game, which wound up being really, really different. And not in a good way. It wound up being really, really bad. My friends list itself used to have constantly 20 plus people playing Diablo 3, but within the span of about a month or two, most of those people were back to playing World of Warcraft, back to playing League of Legends, pretty much doing anything else, washing their cat, for example, as opposed to playing Diablo 3. I wound up doing a lot of things solo, but playing a Demon Hunter that was purely based on attack speed gear and then watching that evaporate overnight, I wasn't particularly ready to do that grind over again, and I wound up actually taking a long break from Diablo. The thing was that legendary items just didn't appear, and they weren't good, so therefore they weren't cool. I wasn't particularly interested in farming gold, as I wanted to play the game and kill monsters on the hardest difficulty to get better loot, and that was a chore all by itself. So that kind of spelled the end for me until better days were to come. And better days did come. It took a while, but Diablo itself, their development team, they decided that they really needed to start doing things that appeased their fans more. Started doing things that their player base really wanted to see. Diablo 3 lacked identity in the beginning. It was a game that it didn't know what it wanted to be, but things would get better. You know, the thing is that it's kind of crazy that Diablo 3 was even allowed to launch in the state that it was in. I mean, never before have we seen Blizzard really have any form of success in any of their games by completely not allowing anybody to test their endgame. I mean, you could make an argument for World of Warcraft, but I mean, was World of Warcraft in vanilla really great in its endgame? It was riddled with bugs, its systems didn't quite make sense, and it took some time for World of Warcraft to really kind of get behind itself and be able to spit out good endgame content that was really engaging and really fun. That was in 2004. When Diablo 3 released in 2012, people were at a fever pitch for Diablo 3. I don't think a lot of people understand how badly people wanted to play Diablo 3 and to literally pour their lifetime into this video game. And not only that, but in today's kind of world, I mean, even 3 years ago, people had a lot less patience for crappy games and crappy systems. And Diablo 3 really faced a lot of backlash because of that. The game was constantly rated low, its systems didn't make sense, it was being constantly compared to Diablo 2, which I still don't think is fair to this day, but considering it was the sequel to its predecessor, people were listing off every single reason why they thought Diablo 2 did all these things better. I feel really bad for the Diablo 3 team, who probably spent countless hours trying to perfect this game and have it be ready for launch. And not only was it not ready for launch, but not only could people not log into the game, but people also didn't have the patience for blunders like this and left the game. And I think it's taken a really long time for Blizzard to actually gain back trust with the Diablo community. Now, I was going to make a video that was going to span from launch all the way through to Season 4, but once I started to go down to the breakdown of patches and how much the game changed, even within the single life cycle of Diablo 3, the game changed dramatically, and it did start to improve. It just took a little bit of time. In the next video, we'll cover the very first legendary item revamp, as well as some changes that were made to classes and the changes that were made to playstyle. Some additions to the game that would give people a reason to want to not only progress, but also to want to progress and gain gear without feeling like they had to give away their firstborn child in order to get a piece of gear just while playing Diablo 3, not including the auction house, giving people a reason to spend time playing Diablo 3. I hope you guys like this beginning video. I've been super excited to get this up and to kind of talk about the past, because I feel like Diablo 3's infancy is kind of one of those dark days that nobody likes to talk about. But we can look back on it now. We can laugh at how fucked up it was. I mean, let's be honest. It was bad. But we can look back and we can talk about it, and we can just be in awe of the fact that not only did Blizzard not give up on this game, but they were able to almost completely turn it around, and now is definitely one of the more fun games out there for PC. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you soon with the next video.